All right. Well, it is 1:30, so Eastern time. So we are going to go ahead and get going. So again, thank you guys for calling in for today's Thriving Thursday. My name is Sarah Norton, and for those of you that don't know me, I am the wellness specialist here at Gatehouse Media. The first thing I want to say is that the listeners will be in a listen-only mode. So if you do have questions, comments, feedback, on your right-hand side, there is the ability to ask a question. I will try to get to all questions at the end of the session. And if there's any questions that I'm not really sure how to answer, I will definitely see what information I can find for you and follow up with you after the session. The other thing I just want to make sure that I am saying is my background is I'm a corporate wellness professional specialist. I am not a dietitian, I am not a doctor, I am not a nurse, I'm not a medical professional. So no information that's being provided in this presentation is meant as specific medical advice. Basically, the information in this presentation is information that I have gathered over the years from research, talking to people, interviewing people, and then also, in all honesty, just my frustration as you know, a mom who has to shop for kids who are always asking for the things that look really cool in the packaging, but just really shouldn't be bought, and I get frustrated with the marketing. So I just wanted to make sure that I am laying that out for everybody. So to be respectful of the time, we'll jump right in. And so we are going to go over a few things this afternoon. We're going to go over what are some of the daily recommended amounts? Why should we bother understanding to read labels? Understanding a little bit of the kind of fuel that we're putting into our bodies. Talk a little bit about sugar, marketing tactics, and then putting it all together. So this always amuses me. I don't know about you guys. And, you know, you'll see that the daily recommended servings, and then they throw out milligrams and grams and, you know, all this stuff. And I don't know about you, but I personally don't shop or think in milligrams or grams. The calories I can kind of figure out. You know, I'm not really good at math, but I can kind of figure that out. But the other stuff, I look at it and I'm like, this isn't even speaking my language. I'm not really sure what this means. 2,300 milligrams actually sounds like a lot. The one thing I do want to make sure I'm emphasizing is that the information that is being provided is for the average woman, the average man. There's always going to be exceptions. There are going to be people with special dietary needs, medical conditions, that sort of thing. But when we're talking about this information, it's just kind of the generic average man or the generic average woman. So what does this mean, right? So if it helps a little bit to have somewhat of a cheat sheet, it is, you know, most of us have had a chance to do some cooking or some baking. So if you take 2,000 milligrams, that equals a teaspoon. About 4.2 grams equals a teaspoon. So technically 4 grams is a teaspoon, but they, the royal, you know, they round down so that the 4.2 is the equivalent to about 1 teaspoon. So what does that mean to us? Well, when we were looking at the daily recommended servings for the average man, the average woman, that really kind of puts things a little bit more in perspective. So you look at the sodium, which when we're looking at 2,300 milligrams, we're like, ooh, that's a lot. Really, it's not. Really, it's just a teaspoon for women. If you look at the sugar for women, 25 grams, that's about 6 teaspoons. So, you know, that really kind of helps have a little bit of a visual, especially, you know, thinking about the sodium and how much of our food is packaged and preserved and flavored with salt. You know, we really do consume way more than the average daily recommended servings. So why? Why do we care? Why do we bother reading or trying to understand the nutrition labels? Because shouldn't the packaging tell us what we need to know, or shouldn't, the information just be intuitive? And no, it's not. We have to understand that the food that we consume is basically the same as, how we fuel our cars. We need the food in order to operate. When it's burned, it creates energy or calories. And when you put fuel into our bodies, it's important to know how much our tanks can hold. And I know that sounds kind of goofy, but when you put too much gas into your car, it's going to spill out. If we put too much fuel into our bodies, it doesn't necessarily spill out per se, but it kind of gathers and it turns into excess fat. And then it's also really important to know the quality of the fuel or the types of fuel that are going into our bodies. Some fuel helps us be more efficient than others. So it is important to understand the nutrition labels are basically what tell us what kind of fuel we're putting into our bodies. And if we think about it again as fuel, there's 3 different types of fuel, not to be beating a dead horse here, but that we are putting into our bodies. So there's protein. Protein, there are some excellent sources of protein and not so excellent sources of protein. Good sources of protein are going to be things like eggs and lean meat, quinoa, lentils, Greek yogurt, almonds, seeds, other things like that. There are bad sources of protein. So even when you hear people who are talking about they're on a high protein diet, it is important to understand there still are bad sources of protein out there. And those are going to be your proteins that have added sugar, like a lot of yogurts, proteins that are packaged in oil, or your highly processed meats like deli meats. And then, we talk about how great nuts are, and they really are, unless they've been processed with something. A lot of the nuts that are out there, you're going to see they're treated with salts or they're treated with honey. And that kind of negates some of the benefits of the protein of the nut itself. My daughter went on a health kick and she saw these things at the store and said, there are these little pre-packaged protein snacks. And she said, I want that. And I was like, okay. I didn't read the label. We got it home and everything was great until we got to the nuts, which were just completely saturated with salt. So that just kind of took away the whole idea that this was going to be a healthy snack alternative. So again, this next bullet, how much protein, it goes back into grams and, doing math and how many grams per pound. But basically the rule of thumb is having about 56 grams a day for the average sedentary man and 46 grams a day for the average sedentary woman. And it is important to know that it is possible, just like any other food, to eat too much protein, because excess protein will be stored as excess fat. And talking about fat, fat back in the day was the thought to be the reason that all food was bad. If you remove the fat, nobody will be unhealthy. But actually, we have a tendency to go like in extremes. There are good fats. Fats are actually substances that help the body. Fat can help you have energy. They're actually a concentrated source of energy. They also allow our bodies to process certain vitamins. Fat contains essential fatty acids that the body is not able to make on its own, which actually assists our heart and our immune system. Fat also cushions and helps protect vital organs and helps us to maintain a correct body temperature. And then also certain fatty acids like omega-3s may provide other benefits, like you've heard with brain function. And let's be honest, fat also makes food taste better. We have to try to remember that. And that comes into play later on when we talk about some of the ways manufacturers try to make up for taking fat out of food. There is definitely a component of taste when it comes to fat. So like I said, there are some good fats, right? So what happens is when you have an unsaturated fats are going to form irregular shapes, and those guys, they can't clump together. They don't like to hang out together, and they don't clump together so easily. And they can also help lower the LDL levels. And if you remember from the Know Your Numbers presentation a couple months ago, LDL is the lousy. That's the only way I can remember it. L for lousy, LDL. And so some of those really good types of fats can be things like nuts, avocados, cheese, certain cheeses, eggs, dark chocolate, chia seeds, extra virgin olive oil. So, these are all good types of fats, but we have to remember too, everything in moderation, right? As much as I love dark chocolate or avocados, if I have like 10 avocados, it's still going to end up being a very negative situation, and I will just flood my body with tons of fat. So it is important to know that there are good fats, there are bad fats, but when you have the good fats, again, moderation is your friend. So if we continue on talking a little bit about fat, we know that there are some fats that don't benefit your body. And there can be a lot of calories when it comes to high fat foods. And so like I said, even with an avocado, you're going to get a lot of fat and a lot of calories if you eat too many of them. It's important to know too that sometimes we're fighting against our bodies. Our bodies are programmed to store food for lean times. So if you eat too many calories, it's going to hold on to that because it's waiting for that next famine, or it's waiting for that next situation where food may be scarce. And we're very lucky that that is most likely not a situation that we're going to have to run into. And it's also important to know, so I mentioned earlier that that can be a cushion for our organs, but too much fat is then going to add bulk to our bodies, and that's going to make our bodies and our organs work much harder than they should. And that's, a lot of times where you hear people talk about like the fat around the middle, because that's really surrounding your vital organs. And so it's just really important to try to make sure you're keeping that balance. You want to have some fat, but not too much fat. So saturated fat is mostly a manufactured fat. There are some meats and dairy that may have some small amounts of saturated fat, and a lot of times that's going to be either because of how the animal was fed, or other minor circumstances like that. But what happens with the saturated fat is the chemical structure affects how our bodies process it. So what happens is these saturated fats, which have trans and hydrogenated fats, these fats are linked to increased cholesterol. And these saturated fats, so unlike the unsaturated fats, these guys form regular shapes and they clump together much more easily, and then they're more likely to stick to the sides of the arteries, which then allows the other saturated fat molecules to build up. So that makes it much more difficult for the heart to pump the oxygen, the blood through the body, and that can assist to leading to higher blood pressure, which then leads to a whole host of other issues. So hydrogenated fat, you've probably heard a lot about hydrogenated or trans fat, and these are really the biggest fats to really try to kind of keep a lookout for when you're reading the nutrition labels. And hydrogenated fat is basically vegetable fat that has been treated with extra hydrogen. So you think of things like Crisco or margarine or those sorts of things. And basically it's the change in the chemical makeup of the fat that makes it go from solid at room temperature, making it solid at room temperature. So technically, these kinds of fats, the unsaturated, the hydrogenated, or the trans fat, these guys can help increase the risk of coronary heart disease, raising the levels of the lousy LDL cholesterol and lowering the good H, or the happy, as we remember from our Know Your Numbers webinar, the happy cholesterol. So the hydrogenated and trans fats are really fats that you want to try to eliminate when possible, even though that's easier said than done, but really try to have in moderation. So the other type of fuel that everybody knows about is carbohydrates, and carbohydrates have all of a sudden become kind of the new fat, right? So whereas everybody was like, everything has to be low fat, now everything is low carbohydrate. And so some people are lumping that into including whole carbohydrates. And it's really important to remember that carbohydrates are your body's main source of energy. The brain and the blood cells rely on that glucose in order to operate effectively. It's really important to remember that good carbohydrates have fiber in them, right? So not all carbohydrates are the same. So you have your whole carbohydrates, and these guys are unprocessed and they contain fiber. So what happens is when you eat them, the body has more than just the sugar, the natural sugar, to process. It has the fiber, it has other nutrients, it has a whole bunch of things that the body is going to go, oh, okay, this is kind of cool, and it's going to break it down and process it more slowly, which minimizes things like the spikes and the dips in your blood sugar. So you're not going to have the same type of reaction to an apple that you might to a candy bar. And so the candy bar, or other refined carbohydrates, cookies or pastas or that sort of thing, those are going to actually have been processed where the fiber has been removed. And so basically all that's left is the sugar or the glucose, or you know what I mean. So basically this can cause more of the blood spikes and crashes. It has no other nutrients. And then a lot of times these refined carbohydrates also have additional sugar added to them for flavoring or for preservatives. So it's just really important to remember that not all carbohydrates are created equal. But again, just like with any other food, even when you're eating whole carbohydrates, everything in moderation. You probably don't want to go out and have, 20, 15 apples because again, your body's going to go, hey, I'm not too sure about all this stuff that you're flooding into me. But there are definitely some carbohydrates that are better than others. So some examples, again, you have for whole carbohydrates, fruit, vegetables, legumes, nuts, seeds, and whole grains. And we'll talk about whole grains in a little bit. And then refined carbohydrates are going to be your things like your cereals, your regular pasta, instant oatmeal, white rice. So, just kind of the things you want to be on the lookout for. Then cue the music and the thunderstorm, sugar. So again, sugar is the new fat as well, right? Sugar is kind of the new, everybody's anti-sugar. And sugars really, again, as we talked about with the carbohydrates, sugars are naturally occurring in things like fruits, vegetables, some dairy. But then it's when the sugars are removed from their original source and added to other foods, you just need to be wary of it. So the World Health Organization recommends that for optimal health, we should restrict our added free sugar intake to 25 grams or 6 teaspoons a day. And it's important to remember that free sugars are those sugars that are removed from their original source and then added to different foods. So again, it's next to impossible to try to eliminate this kind of thing from your diet, but it's just really important to make sure that you are aware of and are paying attention to how much added sugar there is in certain foods. So I apologize for this graphic. I will confess I was too lazy. I didn't feel like typing in all of these different names, but it's just an example to show you, and I don't even think this covers all of it, but there are so many different names that sugar can be called. And, you know, things like fructose and syrups and even juice, you know, I think when we were younger, we all believe, you know, juice is good and healthy. Sometimes it is. But it's important to know that, you know, it depends, right? You're going to have to, that when you see juice, carrot juice, any kind of, you know, juice added to something, the possibility is that there's additional sugar. So it's just really important to be paying attention to that. And then I couldn't talk about sugar without bringing up artificial sugars. So like I said at the beginning, I'm not a dietitian, I'm not a doctor. So I have my own personal feelings about certain sweeteners and that sort of thing. I think it's just really important, if you are somebody who consumes artificial sweeteners, just to make sure that you are aware of which one you're choosing. There are, you know, some of them have gotten worse reputations than others, which may or may not be completely justified. There's different research out there. So I think, you know, if you go out there, you can find a lot of stuff pro or con the artificial sweet sugar world. My thought process on it is, you know, if you are somebody who is really trying to cut down on sugar and you're having a hard time doing that, maybe this is something that could help you. It's important though, if you're somebody who's having a lot of artificial sugar in one day, to be really aware and cognizant of what is in the artificial sugar and knowing that, you know, you're putting that into your body. And sometimes there are things in there that, you know, maybe a little bit here and there is not so bad, but if you're having, you know, a lot of it in a day, it could potentially cause other health issues, you know, like gastrointestinal issues or, you know, other things like that. So it's just really important to be paying attention to what you're putting into it. And there's just two other schools of thought too when it comes to the artificial sugars. One school of thought is, you know, and I'll pick on diet soda, because if you had joined us for Dr. Jenkins earlier in the year, you know, she had said if she was going to suggest anything to help people on a weight loss journey, she would say kick the soda and the diet soda habit. And there's different schools of thought out there. One is if you are drinking the diet soda, you are not, you're kind of stimulating that sweet tooth, so to speak. And then by doing that, you're in the process, you'll train yourself to kind of crave sweet stuff a little bit more. And so then you could potentially eat more because you are, you know, you're not suppressing or trying to suppress that sweet tooth. Another school of thought that's out there is that by drinking excessive amounts of diet soda, your brain gets confused and starts to think that that's actually sugar and will respond in a way that it would if you were actually having real sugar, and then it will spike the glucose, and, you know, and all of those reactions happen. So again, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a dietitian. These are all articles and research that is out in the world about this stuff. But the long story short, and again, I can't emphasize this enough, is just moderation and just understanding what you're putting in your body and the potential for how your body might react to it. So that being said, yay, that part of the lecture's over. And I don't know if any of you recognize this little gal. She's from oh, I'm blanking on it now, but anyhow, Schoolhouse Rock. So, but anyhow, so that was kind of the mind melting part of the presentation. But I think it's important to not only just look at the food labels, but to also understand what it is we're eating and why it is we're, why it's important and how that might impact our bodies. So then the interesting part of this whole process is then all of a sudden you have to become a detective. And that can be kind of challenging, especially when you want to run into the store and run out of the store. You don't necessarily want to take time to, look at everything and try to figure everything out. And way back when fat was the bad guy, I really wanted to try to figure out how to start eating more healthy, and wasn't even thinking about food labels or anything like that, because I thought, boy, you put it in a nice green package and it looks healthy because it's green, and it's just making my brain think that it's healthy, and it's saying it's fat free, and yay, this is an awesome thing. I will buy it. So it wasn't until I realized it wasn't getting any healthier. I kind of took a bit of a closer look at the packaging. And if you look first at the ingredients, you'll see what is the very first thing on the ingredient list was sugar. And as you probably know, when you're looking at ingredients, the things that are first are the things that are in the largest supply in the food. So if you look at the nutrition facts, you'll see that a serving size is 1 cookie. Now, I don't know about you guys, but 1 cookie is just not going to do it for Sarah. So if it does for other people, that's great. For me, maybe 5 cookies. I don't know, maybe 4 or 5. So you look at the fact that, okay, well, for each cookie that I'm having, it's 50 calories. So if I'm having just that 1 cookie, maybe that's not such a bad treat. But if I'm having more than the 1 cookie, if you see not only just the calories, but then you look down to the sugars, it just keeps going up and up. And on this snack alone, if I have just 3 cookies, I'm close to my daily recommended amount for sugar, and there's absolutely nothing of nutritional value in this snack at all. So it's important to understand and know the marketing tactics, right? So like I said, with that 1 box of cookies, they made the box, it's green and it looks healthy, and there's something about it that just makes you think health and wellness. Other things, just, when we see the word light doesn't necessarily mean healthier. Light just means it might have 1/3 fewer calories, or at least no more than half the fat of the original version of the product, no more than half the sodium, a lighter color or texture. But it's really important to know that when you see something that says light or it says fat-free, they replace that taste somehow. Something had to be put in because of what they took away. And so we'll look at that in a minute. Multigrain, to me, is one of those kind of misleading sort of terms. It's all multigrain means is more than 1 grain. Doesn't mean it's the good parts of the grain. It just means there's more than 1 grain in the ingredients. A whole grain, on the other hand, means that all parts of the grain, the kernel, all parts of the grain kernel, the bran, the germ, the endosperm, everything is used. So that's just an interesting distinction to kind of have in your hip pocket. Organic. So organic is, it's a process that farmers and producers have to go through in order to certify that they're not using chemicals and they're growing their product a certain way and that it meets all of those standards. But just because something is organic doesn't necessarily mean that it's healthy, right? Organic sugar is still sugar. So you still have too much organic sugar, you're still having too much sugar. It just means that you're having organic, you're having sugar that maybe wasn't processed, a certain way. So I am not knocking anything organic, but I'm just wanting everybody to understand that just because something has the word organic on it does not mean that it is a a health food in the sense of if you're trying to cut down sugar or cut down on certain things. Sugar-free just normally means that it's sweetened with artificial sugar, and natural just means at some point the manufacturer had something natural to work with. That's it. So like you could have, you know, your high sugary apple juice, and they could say it's all natural. At some point they had an apple to work with, but what they did with it from that point on remains to be seen, and that's where you have to look at the labels. So when you need to be an educated consumer, I put this picture on here because this is a cereal that is one of my trigger foods. I'm one of those crazy people that has those giant bowls. So when I'm filling my cereal in my bowl, it does not look like enough. And this is also, I could probably sit and eat the entire box. So that in my bowl, in the picture there, that's just 1 cup or just 1 serving. I probably would eat 3 or 4 servings if I'm being honest, which is why I don't eat this very often. But it's interesting because if you look at that 1 cup of cereal, when you add 3/4 of a cup of skim milk, it's bringing it from 170 calories to 230 calories. It's bringing it from 13 grams of sugar to 22 grams of sugar. This is a cereal that is kind of promoted as a healthier type brand of cereal. It supposedly helps people lose weight if they, you know, eat this every day. But if you look at the 22 grams of sugar from what we talked about earlier, that's almost my entire daily serving of sugar. So again, I'm not telling people not to ever eat your favorite kind of cereal, but 1, if you're like me and you can't control yourself, maybe this isn't a good choice for you to have on a regular basis. But then 2, this really is one of those moderation, only have it once in a while kind of things. Yogurt can be a pet peeve of mine. I know we're getting short on time, so I'm going to try to go through these pretty quickly. But yogurt is really looked at as a health food. Or a healthy choice or a healthy snack, and I get a little twitchy about it because, and especially too when you look at the low-fat yogurts versus regular yogurt, some yogurts are better than others. You are going to have some that are going to be lower in sugar, but again, those are going to have the artificial sweeteners in them, so it's important to just, again, if you're not having too many artificial sweeteners in the day, maybe that's not a bad choice. But it's just really important to be aware of how much sugar is in some of these foods. And if you look at the low-fat yogurt, like I said earlier, the flavor has to come from someplace. So when you compare the low-fat to the whole milk, you see that the sodium is higher in the low-fat version, and you see that the sugar is higher in the low-fat version. So maybe that is a good choice for you for that day, for that situation, but it's really important to take a look at that and just make sure you know how many sugars, how much sodium, and then, you know, decide, is it worth it? And it might be, but is it worth it to go for the low-fat version versus the whole milk? This is just an example of a 32-ounce sports drink, which you see people drinking all the time who maybe aren't out there in like 90-degree humid heat. You know, if you drank this entire 32 ounces of the sports drink, you will end up with 56 grams of sugar, which is the equivalent of 14 teaspoons. So that's more than double what you should have in any given day. So, you know, it's important to remember that a lot of those sports drinks were designed for football players and people who are out in the middle of the sun, and, you know, so those aren't necessarily the best choices for maybe, you know, somebody like me who's in the stands watching my kid play sports, you know, or just walking around. I'm a coffeeaholic. If you stop at Dunkin' Donuts every day and you get a medium coffee with cream and sugar, just know that's 26 grams of sugar that you're starting your day with. And so you might feel really good after you have that. You might be kind of jonesing and ready to go, but you will have a sugar crash. And this is, I think most of these, the chai might, but most of these don't have whipped cream added to them. So I see a lot of people that, you know, have their coffee beverages with whipped cream. So it's just really important to know what you're consuming. And then I'm going to skip past this one because of time, and I'm just going to do one last one, which is soup. I can get kind of cranky when it comes to soup because it's important for people to know that, you know, I don't know about you, but when I have soup, I'm usually having the can of soup, right? And it's important to take a look at the serving sizes. This says that it has 2 servings in it. So each serving is 100 calories, but I'm going to be having 200 calories, which in and of itself may not be that bad. But in this situation, you want to be paying attention to the sodium. They do have lower sodium options, but then you want to take a look at just to make sure where are they adding the flavor that they took away with the sodium. So, you know, with this particular thing, if I have the entire, you know, can of soup, I'm having almost 1,400 milligrams of sodium just with this one meal. So really the moral of the story is knowledge is power, not that you have to never eat your favorite foods again and not, you know, enjoy yourself if you want to have a cup of coffee, but it's just being aware of what it is you're putting into your body. And I was thinking to myself when I was putting this together, wouldn't it be cool if there was an app? And guess what? I found out there was. I don't get any money from this. I did not design it, but I found this and I thought it was cool and I wanted to share. This app is free, and basically you can scan a food barcode, and it's nice and simple, which I like. It gives you red light, yellow light, green light, and then it explains to you why it's a good choice and why it's not a good choice, and it gives you some of the nutrients and some of the information. So this is just a cool resource I wanted to share that I just found, and wanted to see if I could get that out to folks. So I'm gonna check questions in 1 minute. I want to thank you. I really apologize that that went on a little bit longer than I had meant it to. I'm hoping you got some information out of that that was helpful. I do want to remind you that on June 7th at 1:30, we're going to have our next mindfulness video with Marla Pelletier, and she's going to give us some additional resources for trying to help manage our stress. I'm just going to check to see if I can grab the questions here. I don't see any questions. Just want to make sure. I don't see any questions. So with that being said, I want to thank you guys so much for taking the time to spend with me. And I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day and a great weekend. Take care. Thank you.